What's up everyone, welcome back to the channel, I hope you're well. Today's video we're talking about rest periods. How long should you rest between sets? Now this is going to depend on a number of factors. I'm going to get into these in the video. First of all, please like the video, subscribe for more content, and let's get into it. Follow me on Instagram, link below, let's go. So there's a lot of debate about rest periods, how long you should rest for between sets, and this is going to depend on a number of factors. This can be based on your training experience, what your training goals are, which I'll get onto in a minute. The intensity that you're training at as well. The higher the intensity that you're training at, it's likely that you're going to need a bit more time to recover between sets. If you're training at a lower intensity, you can probably get away with slightly less rest periods. So traditionally it is suggested that if you are training for the purpose of endurance, you'd be normally working within a rep range of above 12 up to 20 reps, maybe more. And because of the lighter weights that you're usually using here, which are about 50 or 60% of your 1 rep max, your 1 RM, because of the lack of intensity in the load, you can usually rest between 30 to 60 seconds if the purpose of your training is endurance. Now, if the purpose of your training is muscle gain, hypertrophy, it's been traditionally suggested that you should rest between 60 to 90 seconds, maybe upwards to 2 minutes max per set. And this is meant to be the sweet spot for muscle building essentially. And your rep ranges here are going to be between 6 and 12 generally. Now, if you're training primarily powerlifting style, say for strength, if you're doing, if you like the strongman style of training and you're doing it purely for strength, usually it's recommended to train within the 1 to 5 rep range. And because of the very heavy load here, which is usually upward of like 85% of your 1 rep max, closer to like 90%, and towards working in very heavy doubles, singles, when you're doing deadlifts and things like that, usually you need, because this is very taxing on the CNS, so the brain and spinal cord, very mentally fatiguing. It's putting a lot of load through the posterior chain, so through your rectus spinae all the way through your back and your legs. These are quite taxing movements, and you generally need a bit longer to rest between sets. So for strength, it's usually recommended to rest between 3 and 5 minutes. Now, whether these are just guidelines, and I think you should base your decision on rest periods more around trial and error and what works for you personally. So what does the science say? Let's get into a study on this, comparing short versus long rest periods. Now, in this study by Schoenfeld et al. In 2016, they looked at 21 young trained males, so these are people with lifting experience, and they assigned them to one of either two groups. This was the short rest period being 1 minute rest between sets, and the long rest period being 3 minutes between sets. So we're comparing a traditional hypertrophy rest period versus a traditional strength, the start of the strength rest period. So both the short group 1 minute rest periods and 3 minute rest period group performed the same 7 exercises per session as part of 3 full body sessions per week over a period of 8 weeks. So 7 exercises for 3 sets of 8 to 12 reps, 3 sessions per week over 8 weeks. After they'd completed this, both groups were then tested on their squat and their bench press for the 1 rep max, and also for the endurance, which was weighted at 50% of the 1 rep max, so a lighter load. They also measured muscle thickness in the triceps and the quadriceps. So what did they find? Well, interestingly, they found that the 1 rep max for the 3 minute group was significantly higher than for the 1 minute rest group, which you can kind of understand. You'd expect that with a longer rest period, especially the 3 minute rest periods usually align more to the strength, so you'd expect a stronger 1 rep max probably in this case. But interestingly, on top of this, they also found that muscle thickness, particularly in the quads, was significantly bigger, much greater than the 1 minute group. So a significant increase in muscle thickness in the 3 minute group versus the 1 minute group. Now, what can this tell us? Well, it sort of cast some doubts on the traditional theory of the strength-based protocol being only between 3 and 5 minutes, and if you want muscle gain you have to be between 60 to 90 seconds rest period. I think what we can deduce from this is that a balance between the two is somewhere optimal if your goal is muscular hypertrophy, so increase in muscle size. If you want to gain some strength and you're looking for hypertrophy, somewhere in the middle is probably the sweet spot, and it's definitely possible to get some strength gains naturally as you look to build muscle. The two sort of come interlinked. If you are able to progressively overload big compound movements, your strength is going to come up over time, and this is likely to lead to adaptations in your body. By progressing the weights you're using, you're likely to gain some muscle size as well. So I think what we can take from this is that you need to look at the exercises that you are performing and make your decisions for rest periods based on the exercises you're performing and the intensity that you're training at. So for example, the study shows that you're likely going to make more progress on your big heavy compound lifts that are quite taxing on the CNS, such as deadlifts, squats, things like that, if you rest for longer. So I would not be advising a 60-second rest period, for example, on big compound lifts. So my suggestion to you would be, if you are performing a compound movement, meaning that it's taking multiple joints and muscle groups through a full range of motion, e.g. bench press, squats, deadlifts, rows, shoulder press, things like that, big movements where you're lifting a heavy load through a full range of motion, I would suggest a rest period upward of 2 minutes per set. So I would rest for me personally, I would rest somewhere between 2 and 3 minutes between sets on those big heavy lifts, and then I would make my rest period shorter on smaller movements. So for example, if you're training calves, calf press, a seated calf press or a standing calf press or something like that, it's not a very taxing movement. You're only isolating the calf muscle, you're not actually taxing the rest of the body. So it's not going to be as mentally and physically demanding as big compound lifts. So for something like isolation movements, so when you're training biceps, triceps, calves, abs, things like that, these smaller muscle groups, I would suggest that you rest somewhere between 60 and 90 seconds between sets, depending on the intensity that you're working at. And I'll get more into a comparison on the different intensities that you can work at in another video. But for this purpose of this, if you are training somewhere between in terms of rate of perceived exertion, so how hard you feel you are actually working, your perception of how difficult this is, how much effort you're putting in. If you're training at a slightly more moderate intensity, somewhere like a 6 or a 7 out of 10, I would suggest not going below a 7. But if you're training at about a 7 out of 10, say, you probably don't need to be resting as long as someone that is taking each set close to failure. If you are truly taking each set close to muscular failure, failing on that last rep, whatever that rep range be, 6, 7, 8. If you're taking each set that intense, you are going to need longer to rest. So if you're training somewhere upward of RPE of 8, 9, 10, I think you're probably going to need a bit more rest period than someone that's training at RPE of 6, 7. And naturally, if you're training at a low intensity, say 6 or 7, you're going to have to bring up your volume accordingly to generate the overload and the stimulus required in the muscle. Whereas you can get away with a bit more of a lower volume at a high intensity, right? Now, another consideration is time management. So if you know realistically that you can only commit to say an hour a day, and you're training 4 to 6 times a week, let's say, look at the volume that you're trying to get in, i.e. the number of reps and sets that you're trying to get in. What are the total number of sets that you're doing per workout? Let's take an example. If it's 20 sets per workout that you are doing, if you rest for 3 minutes per set, that's an hour of rest period already. And that doesn't even factor in the time taken to perform the sets. If you only have an hour to work with, then that's not going to work, right? So then you need to reduce the rest period. So let's say you're performing a leg workout with 3 compound movements and then 3 isolation movements, something like that, then you could reduce the rest period on the isolation movements and keep the rest period at 2 to 3 minutes on the bigger exercises. This way you're going to probably fit the workout in within an hour, so you're going to get your time management, you're going to get sufficient rest on the compound lifts and reasonable rest on the smaller isolation movements. And I think this approach, being sensible with your time management but also giving yourself enough time to mentally and physically recover between sets of heavy lifts that are taxing on the CNS, is the best way to go. Ultimately, this is going to come down to personal preference, so based on your type of training, how you feel like you're recovering between sets, adjust your rest periods accordingly, and ultimately trial and error is the best approach here. If you are struggling to recover between big lifts and you're only resting 90 seconds, maybe up that to 2 minutes between sets. Likewise, if you notice that you're slacking a bit and the intensity is dropping in your session, it probably suggests that you need to reduce the rest period slightly. Be sensible, guys. Do not sit on your phone for 8, 10, 15 minutes swiping away on Tinder, Hinge, texting your mates back. Just don't lose the intensity of your session completely. Make sure that you are keeping the intensity of your session and you're keeping an eye on your rest periods. You can turn your notifications off on all these apps and track your rest periods on your watch or just on a timer on your phone, and keep yourself accountable to the session. That way you can have a more intense and productive session, get in and out, and really just focus on it for that hour or however long you are in the gym. That's it for today's video. Really hope you enjoyed it. Please like the video, leave me a comment, subscribe for more content, follow me on Instagram, and catch you guys on the next one. Have a good day. See you later. Bye.